I'm Miles Sexton, a content creator, activist, and loud and proud disruptor of the norm. On our private bits, we talk about the things and people that don't get talked about enough or at all. Trust me, as a sober, HIV positive, non binary person, I would know. Join me as I chat with people in my life and from around the world whose stories deserve to be heard. Maybe you'll learn something new and you will definitely LOL. Our private bits is also part of the ACAST Curator Network. All right, cuties. Today on Our Private Bits, we have Kain Nathaniel joining us. They are a trans-genderqueer disabled consultant and facilitator of Caribbean descent. They are also the co-founder of True Lives Consulting. Want to say hi, Kain?
Hi.
I'm just so excited to be reunited. I know I already just, fanned for a second, but, from the moment we met, I just had this like energetic connection. And I've been saying this about all of our guests today, but like literally, I remember like I was on a panel, I think it was for JVN hair. And I
Yeah,
just remember like looking out at you and I was like, I can't wait for this panel to be over because I need to talk to you. And like everything I was saying,
immediately.
you were giving me snaps, you were giving me like
Snaps in the chat.
emotions. And I
Yes.
was like, okay, who is this person? I need to learn about them. And I'm just so excited today to like get to know you more.
Yeah, and the feeling was mutual. I was like, I need to walk up to you immediately, introduce myself, and just put myself out there because you were just so charismatic and magnetic.
Aw,
Yeah.
thank you, thank you. Well, I'm so excited to get to have this conversation today because as literally what we were like just saying a few minutes ago, I think that the trans community has so much like diversity, I think, within it,
Yeah.
and that a lot of the time it gets like very categorized down to these like binaries of like
Yeah.
what a trans woman should be, what a trans man should be, and like and I think that there is such a spectrum like with under the umbrella of the word trans.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I really wanted to like dive into this just to give people a different perspective of how trans people are living their life. And the way that you celebrate
Absolutely.
your joy is just like
Yeah.
so amazing. And I just love seeing your
Thank
content
you.
online. So I guess like how do you define your transgender queer identity? I know it's a really big question, but
Yeah. Oh, my eyebrows went up as you were asking that because it's been a journey, but I'll do my best to summarize it as succinctly as possible. Where I'm at right now with defining my identity is I'm trying to keep it as open and fluid as possible
I love
because
it.
that's the truest representation of myself. Um, Coming into the world, I don't even like to say socialized anymore, but I
Mhm.
was raised with the assumption that I was a woman.
Yes.
And so that created such an interesting dynamic in my life. And I'm grateful for all the lessons and experiences I had um, from other people treating me in that way because
Hmm.
it showed me certain things. And I'm sure we'll dive into that as we go on, we dive in a bit
Totally.
further later, but I think right now I identify as genderqueer. I
Hmm.
still use trans just as a placeholder to say, when I came into the world, you identified me a certain way.
Yes.
And when I had more of an ability and access to language to understand myself, I was able to say, no, you're wrong. And that's
Hmm.
all trans means to me is you
Totally.
were wrong.
Yes.
And which is great. It feels so powerful. And genderqueer is a little more specificity about who I am in the world and how I move through
Hmm.
the world. And it just means I don't move through the world as one thing
Yes.
and I don't have a static identity. So it's
Totally.
just a word that means freedom to
Yeah.
me.
I love it. I love it. And I relate so much to that
Yeah.
too, right?
Yeah.
Would was there moments on I guess like your journey? Because how old were you when like I guess you started your transition?
You know what? I have been doing a lot of deep thinking about this and I need to start journaling and put my
Hmm.
story on paper, but
Yes.
elementary school.
Yeah. Wow.
Right?
Okay.
Because that's when you first start to realize you're gonna get divided into boy and girl, right? For
Yes.
gym.
So true. Oh my
Gym
God, such a
classes,
good
that's like the
point.
number one where you
Yeah.
realize, I don't know which side to choose.
Totally.
And it's distress and it's
Yes.
stressful for us. Yeah.
Huh. Did you feel like at a point in your sort of journey, like, did you feel like you needed to like go to the opposite binary of like what you were assigned at birth? Or like, yeah, like what was that like for
That's a
you?
really good question.
Yeah.
Actually, I think, early on in my childhood, it was definitely like, okay, you only have two choices.
Yes.
So if I don't feel like I'm the choice that people are giving me, then it just means that I should go to the opposite side, right?
Yes. Totally.
Question mark. And
Totally.
no one was around to answer that question for
Yeah.
me. So I just chose what was available.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it felt like being a man was that what I wanted? I kind of didn't really question it, but I was like, okay, there's a term that existed at the time. I don't know this generation is still using it, but
Yeah.
tomboys.
Yes.
And so I was
Totally.
like, maybe I'm a tomboy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which
And
the original non-binary identity, I
yeah,
think. Yeah.
100% it was, right?
Yeah.
But, like, how did that, like, okay, so we landed on tomboy, at that time, and I guess,
Yep.
like, did like, what felt right, what didn't feel right, like, when you were sitting in that, like, when at that moment?
I actually have a funny story. I don't know if it's a story, but something to kind of add on to that. At the time when I was growing up, it was the late 90s,
Mhm.
early 2000s, and Spice Girls was a big part of my
Yes.
life. They were one of the first
Same.
girl groups that I had. And so the way I decided I was a tomboy was not only because of the binaryism in
Mhm.
elementary school, but because I saw the different identities in Spice Girls and I would
Yes.
choose which one I felt more related to. And so all the really feminine Spice Girls didn't really click with me. Like Baby, I loved, but I
Yeah,
was like, I'm not Baby.
totally.
It's like I love Scary Spice, but I'm not that confident.
Yeah.
And so I was like, Sporty Spice, right?
I
So
love
I was
it.
like, that's my gender,
Oh my god.
but I didn't know.
That's hilarious. I
Yeah.
also was obsessed with Spice Girls because, like, my parents were like, "Oh, you can only like Sporty Spice because you're a boy."
Oh my
So I was, like, forced
goodness.
into only liking them, but I was, like,
That's so
such a
interesting.
Posh fan because I just thought
I
Posh
see
was
it.
so sexy and,
Yeah.
like, it's how I wanted to
Are we
be
allowed to
and, like
cuss?
pardon?
Are we allowed to cuss?
Yeah,
I
oh
was gonna say
yeah, oh
like
yeah.
Posh is cunt.
Oh,
Like
totally. Yeah,
you're
yeah.
definitely giving that. Yeah.
100%. Like,
Yeah.
I was like in the movie when she's, like, running through the field at, like, the military school and her heels are going into the
Yes!
grass. I was like,
Oh my that's literally you. Every time I
"That's
see you,
me."
you're wearing, like, the highest heels possible, like, that's literally you. Yeah, shout out to Posh, like,
Yeah.
really doing it for the
Oh
queers.
my god. Yeah,
Yeah.
David Beckham is a very lucky
Oh,
man.
yeah, and their family, they're just
Oh,
so cute.
so
They're
gorgeous.
beautiful. Yeah.
But, we
Yeah. Let's
we
yeah,
veer,
we
but, like,
veered.
I have to take that moment for the Spice Girls.
Yes.
I agree. So, was there, like I guess so, I mean, for myself anyway, I feel
Mhm.
like there was a huge moment where, like, for quite a few years, I was living definitely, like, leaning way more into, like, my divine femininity. Like, I was really questioning whether or not I was gonna transition, into, like,
Mm.
identifying as a woman. And, I was sort of, like, navigating that, and for me, like, it was, like, I was wearing a lot more makeup, I was wearing, full face of makeup every single day,
Oh my
like,
god, the dedication.
yeah, it was a lot.
Wow.
Oh, so much time before you're
Yeah.
going to work, like, was wearing more feminine, like, a really, really feminine clothing, like, I
Mhm.
really wanted to present as female, like, out in the
Yeah.
world. Did you have, like, a similar moment to that, like, when you were going through, like, the tomboy thing where you were like, "I'm like, am I gonna transition into male?" Or, like
Yeah.
yeah.
That's a oh my goodness. I'm, like, time traveling right now
Yes.
because there was a bit of a process. So it started as diving deep into hyper femininity to
Yes.
hide what I
Yeah,
was dealing
totally.
with. And then as I got older, so as we enter middle school age, I forget what age that is specifically, let's say like 11 or 12 or something, I started to dress in baggier clothing. So
Yes.
instead of going for something that was more affirming and having access to clothes that maybe were more tomboy
Yeah.
but fitted my body, it was actually like I'm gonna hide my body
Mhm.
and wear double XL clothes or
Totally.
yeah, borrow something from my mom's closet that wasn't my size, but
Yes.
was just a
Totally.
sweater. Yeah, so I think, there wasn't any opportunity to have that middle ground or go to my parents or even some relatives and just be like, "Hey, can you take me shopping and get me something a little more
Yeah.
me?" So I just made do with what I had. Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. But, like,
Yeah.
were your parents, like, supportive of, like, wearing
Yeah.
the baggier clothes, like, and
Oh.
presenting more masculine or
I don't even know to this day if
yeah.
they noticed that change. I mean, I stopped wearing the clothes that they were choosing, so
Yeah,
I feel
fair.
like they're just like, "Why are you so upset that I'm buying dresses for church?"
Yes.
And I'm finding it hidden in your closet, and I actually almost cut up one of the dresses at one point, and my mom caught me in the process and then, like, obviously didn't do it, but
Oh my
that's how much
god.
I hated dresses back
Yeah.
then, which I now love. But, they weren't supportive because they didn't wanna see it. I think it was out of sight, out of mind. I don't wanna notice that my child is clearly struggling with something, and I don't
Mhm.
have time to because 'cause I'm working full time overnights, and I'm not really around to notice these
Fair.
changes. So, I think that was a saving grace for me in terms of, like, okay, I can play around with how I'm dressing
Yes.
myself. I have a little bit of freedom in that sense, but I don't have the funds to go out and find the clothes that feel best for me. So, in a way, I was lucky, that they didn't notice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess so you had that opportunity to kind of like explore a bit
Yes,
of
exactly.
that.
I was a kid of the street, so I was always hanging
Yeah.
out at my friends' places
Love
or I
it.
was outside. So that was my way of not being in a home where I would have had to play a gender that I wasn't, even though I
Totally.
didn't know that that's what I was doing.
Well, because I think it's interesting because you said like, because you're born in Toronto, right?
Yeah, born and raised in
So I
Toronto.
never meet people that are actually from Toronto. I feel like everyone is from somewhere that we all like meet in this amazing
Yeah,
city,
that's
you know?
true.
But like, did you have like being in Toronto where it is so diverse? Like, did you see people around you that were like, were expressing themselves in a way that you wanted to?
I think Toronto, West End, elementary schools, or even just in the West End in general
Yeah.
from the 90s to the 2000s was very interesting
Hmm.
because even though there wasn't really as much outright anti-trans, anti-queer
Yes.
campaigns in the media and in
Yeah.
the news, it was more of like an undercurrent or something that was just built into society. So for us in Etobicoke, where I grew up, there were kids that were openly gay and
Yeah.
were saying it.
Amazing.
And they were definitely made fun of in terms of like, oh, you're so feminine or you're so fruity or like, why are you
Hmm.
wearing that or why do you do this with your hands or stuff like that. But they were still accepted in a way,
Hmm.
but they were like kind of forced to hang out with the girls only. So if you're a gay
Yes.
man, like you just hang out with the girls, the guys don't want to hang out with you, but they're
Okay.
not necessarily going to attack you all the
Yeah.
time. I'm sure it happened.
Totally.
But in terms of seeing visible queer and trans people, I would say when we would go downtown, the rare moments that we would go out as a family, we would see people that were clearly trans, but my parents being raised Caribbean,
Yes.
Trinidad and Grenada, and then immigrating here, there were definitely trans people in the Caribbean,
Yeah.
but they didn't have the language for it. So they would see a trans person and be like, oh, look, a drag queen or something like that.
Mm.
So I mean, I'll take it
Yes.
over being like, "Ew, let's get away from that person," or something like that, which I'm sure my mom did back then, but I don't remember. But I think in terms of exposure, it was very, very limited to when we would leave our end of Etobicoke and go downtown. That's when I was able to see queer and trans people. But at school, they were very much like they would dress like everybody else. So
Mhm.
to say that I saw visible queerness, not really. I saw people trying their best to fit in and
Totally.
fly under the radar. And so I learned that if I was going to try to explore that part of myself, that I was either going to get bullied way more than I already was and
Mhm.
be ostracized, or I would have to just hide.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are my options.
It's so interesting because, for someone like myself who grew up in Nova Scotia, like I was like, like what would my life
Mm,
be like if I lived in Toronto? But I still think it's like, I think it's like those rare moments of being on Queen West and seeing
yes.
just people expressing themselves is such a like gift,
Yeah, Young and Dundas was like the hub to see all of
Totally. Oh
that.
my god.
Yeah.
So like I think it is so great that you were able to have maybe those little moments of just even
Yes.
just seeing like individuality,
Oh, it saved my mental health, even though
Yes.
I literally had no idea what the word gay meant. And back then it
Totally.
was used as a slur and all of that. It was like we were in the before times. So gay was not something you said openly. It was just like you whisper it or
Totally.
yeah,
So true,
during
yeah. It was such a
recess. And
derogatory, like,
yeah,
thing, like, to say.
exactly. Exactly.
Huh. Did like, for your parents too, because I think it's really interesting about the Caribbean specifically, because there's a lot of, like, subcultures within the Caribbean that have third genders.
Yeah.
And, like, but unfortunately, like, religion and colonialism has, like, really stigmatized those third genders. But I think I really use that as an example a lot of the time
Hmm.
of, like, especially I can't remember which island it was that had, like, a really high population of, like, intersex people, as
Ooh, I
well,
don't
that's
even
in the
know about
Caribbean. Yeah,
that.
it's
Okay,
like
come on,
yeah,
research.
it was really, really interesting, but, like, were your parents, like, aware of that at all? Like, was that a part of the culture? Like, I never grew up in the Caribbean, so I wonder if that was, like, ever a topic of conversation.
Ooh, only in recent years
Yeah.
because I've been able to break ground
Yes.
with one of my parents. So I
Okay.
don't have contact with my father and I
Okay.
haven't had for a long time and that's best for me.
Yeah.
And so with my mom, we were able to touch base at certain points in my transition. I'm going to call it that for now, but I stopped calling it a
Yes.
transition as well. But we had a conversation about like, hey, did you notice trans people or queer people around you when you were still back home? And
Mhm.
she said, yeah, there were trans women. She was like, trans women, I guess that's what you call them. And I was like, yeah, 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 you could use that. It's not a
Okay,
slur. Like,
so
they're
cool.
scared to say the word
Yeah,
trans because it
totally.
feels like wrong to them
Yes.
still. And I'm like, it's fine. But she said, we would have the one or two in our, let's just call it a village for lack of a better word. And
Yes.
we knew them, but people would they were isolated. They
Mhm.
had certain areas that they would stick to, and people would kind of point fingers and have these nicknames for them that
Yeah.
they thought were harmless, but it was actually a slur or things that were clearly making the person feel uncomfortable. And she said, I never knew how to help them, but they were always so sweet and friendly to me,
Mhm.
and we really like them, and they dress so nice, and they're always so, she always said like they had a flair, and I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
so
Oh,
people
I
notice
love
us,
that.
and we bring something, and we add something to the culture, but they don't know necessarily how to include us in their
Yes.
community. So they do exist back home, and I think just as a quick little fact, Trinidad has a they elected someone into government who's a trans woman as well.
No
And
way. I didn't know
this
this.
happened in the
What?
pandemic.
That's
Yeah. So
amazing.
like learning about intersex community back home in the Caribbean and then hearing about this, I'm like, okay, things are changing slowly. They
Yes.
still have the buggery laws that are very archaic about
Okay.
like you're not allowed to be caught,
Yeah. Okay.
in
Yes.
sexual relations
Yes.
with the same gender, and so that still exists even though they don't uphold it, officially, but it's
Mhm.
there for them to use whenever they want.
Totally,
So,
which
kinda
needs to be
scary.
dismantled.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Get rid of it, get rid of
Uh,
it. It's 2023, come on.
agreed,
Yeah.
agreed. Okay, so going back, I wanna sorry, I feel
Yeah,
like we're
yeah,
jumping so
yeah.
much, but I love it, I love it. But going back, I guess, like, to, your journey, was there ever moments where, like, you felt, like, any sort of, like, dysphoria, like, with your body or, like, with how
Mhm.
you were presenting? Was that something that was, like, present for you?
Ooh, yeah, I think specifically, I would say late elementary, I was concerned about the girls who were excited about growing breasts. They
Mhm.
were so excited. And so by the time we got to middle school, there was even more girls around me and including my friends talking about how they excited they were to
Yeah.
hopefully be able to wear a bra soon or get their first bra. And I remember when those conversations kept happening, a, a part of me inside would just kind of like tighten up. Like I
Mm.
couldn't breathe and I felt tense and I started panicking, and I now know that that's an anxiety attack. I
Yes.
didn't know that's what it
Totally.
was, and that would happen every single time. And later in life, I realized like, oh, that was me experiencing dysphoria
Mhm.
because I didn't want my body to do that. I never wanted a chest. I didn't want to have to wear a bra, and that was something I decided from grade 6, so whatever age that is, and that was very young.
What about that do you think was causing the dysphoria? Like
Oh, I now understand that it was
yeah.
like, I don't want kids. I knew
Yes.
I didn't want kids
Mhm.
from a very young age, and it's interesting that I was able to decide that, but it's based on a very dysfunctional family
Mhm.
upbringing that I was like,
Yes.
"Oh, I don't wanna recreate that,"
Yeah.
right? And I don't want my body to have to go through the process that I saw growing up. I actually was there for all of my siblings' birth, so I
Yes.
saw the process,
Wow.
and that was actually a little traumatizing for
For
me,
sure.
and I don't think kids should always be in the room as that's happening, but it was
Yeah, it's
nice
a
to
lot.
see the birth of to see life happening.
Yeah.
But I knew that I didn't want my body to do that. I knew I didn't want traditional family. As I learned that you could adopt, I was like,
Yes.
oh, okay. If I don't want biological kids, I
Yeah.
can always adopt. It's fine. So
Totally.
I decided like I don't need a chest because one, it doesn't make me feel authentic to myself.
Mhm.
I just don't feel a sense of calm when I think about having that part of my body happen. And then as a practical thing, I was like, I don't want kids, so don't even need them.
Yeah.
So why not get rid of it?
Totally.
Yeah.
Was
Yeah.
like, because you had top surgery,
I
right? Yeah,
did.
yeah.
Yeah, in 2020.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know how it managed to happen in the
No?
middle of lockdowns, but
Oh my god,
I
what?
had it scheduled in March. Actually, the week lockdowns were announced, I was days away from surgery. Everything was planned, and I get the call, and I was like, I had already seen the updates on social, so I was like,
Yes.
I knew lockdowns were happening, so I was like, all right, let me pick up this call, and they were like, I'm so sorry, we have to put you back on the wait list. We don't know when we can
Oh
reschedule. We're figuring stuff out,
no.
and my heart just sank because that was me waiting. What age was I in 2020? I'm 30 now, or turning 30
Yeah.
in October, and so I had waited over 2 decades,
Yeah.
like over 2 decades of
Oh
my
my
life waiting for
gosh.
that surgery. So I was like, okay, if I've waited this long, I can wait a bit longer. I hope it's not years, but we didn't know at the time. And then luckily, a few months later, I got it at the end of June, and I was able to get top surgery.
Oh,
So I'm so grateful. It has literally saved my mental health from being in a place that I wouldn't have been able to survive in the last few years without this.
and I think that that is what is so important. I think with all of these anti-trans protests that are
Yeah.
going on right now, it just the way that like people are just like weaponizing
Yeah.
the modifications or the surgeries or the like hormone blockers and all of these sort of things. It's like these are all things that are saving people's lives.
Yeah.
And it's like this is not a weapon.
How do you
That's
argue with that? You
like
know, like that's that you're literally, if you argue at that point, what you're saying is your life doesn't matter to me. You shouldn't exist on this planet, even though I get to
yes.
exist and I get to live a full
Yeah.
life. I don't think you should live a full life.
100%.
And that just, I can't process that. I can't
No.
comprehend how someone could want another human being to not exist simply because you don't understand who they are as a person and their community and their culture. Because it's cultural differences at
Yeah,
this point,
absolutely.
you know?
But it's like, why and this is something I never understood either, is like, why do people who are not trans get to decide and make decisions for trans people or like any type of community? It's like, why are not the communities itself deciding what is best for them because it is their
100%.
experiences, you know? Like, I don't know. It's
Absolutely.
just like I really I find it so frustrating a lot of the time, when I see like when laws are being passed by,
Yeah.
heterosexual men and
And we're
like I don't
nowhere in the room to be
no,
able to consult or to share our experiences or anything to inform
totally.
policy and to inform law. And where are we in the room? We're not
Yes.
there. And
Agreed.
it's clear.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely it is. Okay, so in a moment of celebration, you have your top surgery and you
Yes.
get the reveal. And
Yes.
like what was that? Like what was that moment of joy like for you?
Oh my goodness. It was so complicated
Yeah?
because, you spend the years leading up to it. So I had actually gone on hormones December 2019.
Okay.
So I'm coming up on, I'm over 3 years on hormones. So that was also a saving grace
Yes.
when I got the announcement that I would get put back on the wait list for top surgery, right? I was
Ah,
like, okay, I'm on hormones
yeah.
though. The
That's
process has
great.
started. I'm
Yeah.
good. So that was just something that was important to note as well for me. But when I got it, we were in the middle of lockdowns and no one knew that much about COVID at the time, right?
Yeah.
We were all very anxious. It was
Totally.
stressful. And you didn't know if it was okay to even be physically close to
Yes.
people, right? So
Absolutely.
picturing that, I get top surgery, I'm in recovery. I couldn't even have a celebration or like
Oh,
a party
no.
or something to invite
Yeah.
my friends and just have that reveal with them and to document it. I have
Yes.
no videos really. I have like a few clips, some photos,
Yeah.
but it didn't look the way that other trans people have posted on
Yes.
socials. And there's been a specific type of complicated heartbreak and regret and grief around that.
Mhm.
But a saving grace and a big, big, big celebration for me was I was able to get booked later that fall in 2020 for Shine True,
Okay.
which is on Out TV and Fuse TV.
Yes.
And it was produced by Michelle Mama. Shout out to Michelle
Ah.
Mama. And a whole team of queer and trans folks behind it and involved in producing it. And that was where I was able to celebrate my top surgery. I think my episode was centered around what did we call it? A new moon ceremony because there was going to
Yeah.
be like a full moon or something like that. And so we did a fire and I was able to talk about my experience and my
Ugh.
joy and celebrate with a few of my not all, but a few of my
Yeah.
trans and queer friends around me. And that was more than enough for me. And that was such a privilege to have as a racialized trans person,
Totally.
especially.
And I think it's like I think that there's such a good lesson in that too of like, maybe it didn't, in the moment when it happened, it didn't turn out the way that you wanted it to, but like we have the power to like reclaim that moment and also like we can do it at another time
Could do it
too.
another like,
Yeah.
right?
And
Because
like
I got
let me
surgery in
rewrite it.
June, and then
Yeah.
we celebrated in the fall, so by September, we were filming, and I forgot to mention it was a show that centered kind of a journey and a makeover and a whole, like, life coaching process for 2S LGBTQ+ youth in particular, I think. So each episode documents a celebration
Yeah.
and some kind of journey and process in their lives, and I'm grateful I was able to be chosen for that season, and yeah, it was I think you need that ceremony. I think you need
Mhm.
that kind of closure or a process to be able to release the grief of all the years that you lost to hiding, to not being
Absolutely.
able to exist. Like to lose, and I just want for anybody listening that's not aware of what that grief actually feels like to picture losing over 20 years of your life, not being able to actually like speak or be heard
Mhm.
or be seen, and for other people to know that you're just like them, you're hiding and you're constantly waiting for all these lives within you to actually be able to come out and to be
Yes,
there. And yeah, this is why people take their lives because they can't even be heard or be seen.
totally. It's like people don't realize it. Just it feels like you're not existing in the
Yeah.
world, and
But
it's
you're in
like,
front of you're like you're standing in front of
yeah,
people, but you're not even there.
totally.
How do you even rationalize that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's really the most awful
Yeah. It's a
feeling.
prison.
It
Yeah.
100%. It
Yeah.
is.
It's like being in the upside down. It's like being at whatever, you've seen on TV of like
Totally.
someone being in a completely different world and they can't get back to earth or back to everyday life. That's what it felt like.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I totally
Oh
relate to
yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Did you feel like, so then there's like, you have your top surgery, you go on testosterone. Like, was there a moment where there was like almost like too much like masculine energy like coming in that you were like, okay, no, this is where the gender queerness came
Oh,
in?
I fell into the gender quantum realm. Like it was
Yeah.
such a wild thing because internally your whole world is changing,
Yes.
right? You're going through second puberty. You are coming to terms with who you are, and then you're trying to make sense of it because you spent your whole life being someone disingenuine and inauthentic to yourself.
Hmm.
So now you're like, who am I? So I haven't been allowed to actually
Totally.
decide what that is. I don't even understand who I am. And at the same time, you're socially transitioning.
Yes.
So when you bring other people into the mix, that's when it gets really complicated and painful. So
Hmm.
for me, trying to explore what masculinity, if it meant anything to me at all, and what it meant to me
Yes.
was so much harder when I had queer community kind of sexualizing me or being really excited about the fact that I could be someone more masculine and
Hmm.
being called a top all out of nowhere and being like, I don't even know about the top bottom dichotomy because I've never been a part of the gay
Totally.
culture. Like I've been hiding. I don't even know if I'm going to be a part of that community because
Yes.
I'm ever going to be seen as like a real gay man if that
Yes.
was where I landed. So that's a whole other thing. But so I'm grappling with being understood and seen by queer community and then having to exist around cis
Yes.
hetero folks.
Hmm.
So not using that as a slur. I know that some folks are uncomfortable with the word cis, but again, in terms of like trans meaning you got it wrong at birth, cis meaning you got it right. And I'm comfortable and I want to be the gender I was assigned when I first came into the world. So
Totally.
having to exist around cis hetero people, that's when I realized, oh, I don't know if masculinity feels right for me or
Hmm.
being read as a man because what they know as a man is so violent and
Hmm.
patriarchal and nothing that I want to be. And that's actually why I'm so happy to be queer and be trans because it means I'm free from all of that crap.
Yes,
So,
exactly.
so then I'm like, wait, so if I'm not a man in the way that cis straight people understand manhood, then what is manhood? What is
Totally.
masculinity?
Yeah.
And that's when I fell into the quantum realm of gender and had to be like, then why do I have surgery? And why did I go on hormones if I don't want
Yes.
to be a man? And I had people questioning that,
Yeah.
queer
Totally.
people
Of
questioning that.
course.
And then people trying to take my femininity away
Yeah.
because they thought, oh, you're on hormones and you're getting top surgery. Then
Yeah.
you obviously don't like femininity and don't want
Totally.
it at all. And I was like,
No.
no, I need time to figure out, what external expressions mean to me. So, for example, like people want to know if you're going to change how you dress,
Yes.
and if you're going to continue wearing makeup, and if you're going to change your hairstyle, and all these other pieces. I didn't even really care about that.
Yeah.
Honestly, whatever I wear and how I look is just how I'm choosing to express myself, and we
Mhm.
never question it when artists do it,
Totally.
right? And performers. So why when a trans person who, maybe on paper changes from point A to point B, if
Yes.
that's how people are understanding it, then um what was the point I was making? Oh my god, I lost it.
But, like, I mean, to what you were saying,
Yes.
though, is, like, I think when we're kids, right, and we go into, like, the tickle trunk of clothes,
Yes.
and we pick up a dress, or we pick up a blazer, or
Yep.
whatever, it's like we're not looking at it as masculine and feminine. We're just looking at this expression as, like,
It's
"Oh,
beautiful
this."
fabric and
Exactly,
all this
I'm just putting
glittery
it
stuff.
on, it's
Yeah.
society that is, like, forcing us to, like, categorize, I think, a lot of
Yeah.
these, like, masculine and femininity, and it's like, there's so
Yeah.
much, like, I just recently read this book on, like, testosterone and estrogen and, like, how different it is in every single body, and that it's actually really,
Ooh.
like, you you can't say that, like, men and women have, like, more testosterone or more
Mhm.
estrogen because that's actually, like, not true at all,
Yep.
and, like, can't be proven because like we all have such like drastically different amounts and like how it expresses and how
Yeah.
what parts of our body like create it and so it's like
It's almost like everything is so individual that we need to get rid of all the boxes that exist because it's not
totally.
working.
But that's just it, and it's like I think a lot of this, like, like we as humans created language. We created all of these
Mhm.
constructs. We created all of this. And like, and it's just unfortunate that like, now we're sort of in this time where we're trying to like really like relearn and get rid of these like colonial constructs that were developed for control,
Yes,
right? And to like
exactly.
control like, marginalized communities and marginalized people. And, so but it's like where do we land, now? And it's like how do we move forward? And so like yes, I think it is good that we have like, terms like non-binary and
Yeah.
we're able to like, grow forward, I think, like in this sort of journey. But I agree with you. It's like, do we eliminate it?
Yeah.
Do we still continue with these like categories? Like, I don't know. I don't know what the solve is in this
Right? And
situation,
I
you
think
know?
that's our generation's task. I think that's our
Totally.
era's kind of our battle, our struggle. Like right now we're in this unraveling, we're in the process of decolonization and
Hmm.
we're starting to question and pick at everything and the generations coming up are saying enough is enough and they
Yes.
are ready to throw stuff away. So
Totally.
the problem is like we have everything so solidified in law and then, the medical system is set up a certain way and
Yes.
they've divided it into binaries and boxes that now we have to kind of like we'd have to start from scratch again.
Yeah.
And that's not possible because it's all happening already every day and all the time. So it's kind of like how do we start to consult and ask the communities that are affected and most impacted and vulnerable about
Hmm.
how we can move forward with that. And that would be to us LGBTQ plus folks, disability,
Yes.
community and of course newcomers as well who are
Absolutely.
coming into this land and what that means for them from other cultures. So I even think back at the during the lockdowns who was so upset about and who was vocal about how upset they were that gyms were closed. Like there was a lot
Yes.
of cis
Yes.
straight men that were
Totally.
upset that they couldn't work on their bodies
Yes.
and that they couldn't access what I am understanding gender affirming resources.
100%.
So they were feeling really complicated and dysphoric in their bodies. And that was something that was a light bulb moment for me. And then I've also done a segment with City Line where I was on a panel with I was the only trans person. And there was a panel of cis women, and we were talking about breast reductions.
Hmm.
And the thread that was so common between all of us was that we just wanted access, agency, and choice about our bodies. And really, even cis women want breast reductions or they want top surgery just to
Totally.
to get rid of a chest that they don't want.
Yes.
And it's not related to transness. They just don't necessarily want it. And that's
No.
becoming more common in my
Totally. I
life.
mean, it's like also like a medical thing too. Like I know
Exactly.
so many like women. I have women in my life that had to just get a reduction as well
Absolutely.
because it's like it was
Pain
actually
relief
like
sometimes.
totally was causing
Yes.
them like literally chronic pain,
Yes.
you know? But
Exactly.
it's like but it's also comes down to like haircuts too. It's like how many
Mhm.
women go get like, their hair done. It's like that is gender affirming care,
Exactly.
like
It's not weird. It's just when we label it a certain way and then they
totally.
weaponize it and demonize it, then it starts to feel like a weird thing. But when you actually talk about it the way we're doing right now, it's like, oh, this is all normal. I think humans just want to be able to have choice and to express
Yes.
themselves. And the more that you try to control them and say no and push down on them, the more you're going to see more mental health
Hmm.
issues, you're going to see more violence, you're going to see more interpersonal violence because when people can't be themselves, they're going to take it out on the next person, which is
Absolutely.
their own community.
Totally. 100%. And stop using marginalized communities as political,
Please, we are
like
not your
votes.
monopoly
No,
pieces.
like I'm so sick of it. So sick of it,
Yeah.
especially with this like whole
And
anti-trans
it ends up being
things.
kids being the ones who are the
Yeah,
weapon,
exactly.
right?
Of course. But it's just like it's such an old tactic. Like,
Yeah.
you look at like the first round of, the queer liberation groups, and it was the same thing. It was like they're
Yeah.
literally using tactic like, oh, like queer people, trans people, they're pedophiles. And it's
Yeah.
like it's literally the same thing that's happening again. And I'm just like the amount of times I've been called a pedophile in the last
Yeah.
year, I'm like,
It's such a
ah,
cheap shot. It's a really
literally.
easy
It's like this is all
trick.
you got? Like,
Yeah.
okay,
Like we
let's
see through it and I hope people
yes.
are seeing through it because even if it's not to LGBTQ plus community, then
Yes,
they're going to choose the next
totally.
marginalized group, the
It's like
next group.
race.
Yeah,
Like
then
now,
it's
now, and
race.
now we're attacking race, and
Next is
it's
going to be
like
disability. It's always disability,
always,
but and that's
yeah.
the thing I noticed too is like they want to compare. This might take us off topic, but just to put it out there, they are trying to also compare transness to disability, but in a negative way, where it's like,
Yes,
oh no, these people are definitely mentally ill,
yeah,
and it's such an old school argument as well, and that needs to go out the window
one
because
hundred percent.
trans people who are neurodivergent and are disabled exist, and
Yes.
so what does that mean for them?
Totally. But to your point, like I was reading an article that just came out, and it was like being trans or non-binary or whatever, gender fluid, it's like that is not actually like the mental illness or like any sort of like the mental distress that happens. It
Mm-hmm.
actually doesn't have to do like it's now been like proven that it doesn't have to do with wanting to transition. It's actually the pressure that society is putting on them
Yes.
and them the fact that they have to come out and they have to go through the transition, that is what's causing the mental like any type of mental illness or distress.
Exactly.
It's like not actually, it doesn't have anything to do with who they actually are,
Yeah, that
you
was
know?
true for me. It was really other people that created such a distressing and suffocating
Mhm.
environment for me to try to live in and exist in, that it made me feel like I should shrink, I should be quiet, I should hide, I should self-harm, I should do all kinds of
Yes.
things to myself because I'm the problem, I'm wrong. And the whole time it was because other people weren't taught and educated how to show compassion and be understanding and
Mhm.
open to people who are simply living a different culture and life than you. It's not a lifestyle, but a different life than you.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly. Ugh,
Yeah.
I love
Mic
it.
drop.
I love listening to you talk. Oh, you're
Yeah.
amazing.
Likewise. It's mutual.
So, I guess, like, on the topic of, like, masculinity and, like, femininity, like, what does that look like for you? Like, what makes you feel masculine? What makes you feel feminine? Like, how have you sort of, like, defined that for yourself? Because, as you were kinda touching on earlier,
Yeah.
you were like, like, "This actually doesn't I don't wanna be a man like this. This is what masculinity represents." So I'm curious, like, how does that represent in your daily life
Oh,
now?
exciting. Such a challenge because, like, this is honestly a lifelong process. And where we're at right now
Yes.
in queer community, it's so interesting to see such a vast spectrum of feminine and masculine
Mhm.
energies. I think
Yes.
that's the best way to
Totally.
honestly talk about it because there isn't like a standard or a list of things that you need to meet to be masculine or feminine. It's more like how do you embody these elements that we currently understand as like maybe femininity is more aligned with nurturing,
Mhm.
caretaking, and not in a dismissive or belittling way that people have assigned it to cis women, but like
Mhm.
the roles that people play in community. I think that's how I look at
Yeah.
masculine and feminine energy. And so when I'm embodying that, I think it's almost like a performance. And I like calling it that
Yeah,
because when I step into the world, I have to be a different person at any given moment on any given
for
day,
sure.
depending on what's needed from me. So, it's how I carry myself in my body, even just how I hold my shoulders, how I move through the world, my mannerisms. And it's absolutely my external expression. Like what I'm wearing does
Mhm.
contribute to that energy. So
Totally.
when I wear something more form fitting or a silhouette that's like tight to my body, I do see that as like it's more sexy. And so it's like this like dark feminine energy that
Mhm.
I wanna show off, and then when I wear, like, maybe something more tailored
Yes.
and structured, then that's like, "Okay, I'm going into boss energy." I'm
Yeah.
like the
Ooh.
business energy, like, which absolutely can, like, blur and be fluid and all of that, but I like when there is that option to step into
Mhm.
an energy, if that makes sense. I feel like
Absolutely.
you definitely walk through the world with that understanding, so I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
So, I was discussing this with someone else the other day on Instagram, and, like, because for me, in my life, like, I guess, like, I've had to really, like, how do I, like, reclaim masculinity? How do I
Mhm.
reclaim femininity? Because, it's, like, been the cause of so much of my shame in my
And
life.
you talked to me about how you felt like people tried to take your femininity away
Always. It
too.
was, like, weaponized for
Mm.
me growing up. Like, it was, like, any ounce that it sort of leaked, it came out, like, it was, like, that's what people targeted, and
Ooh.
it was so awful, but now it's interesting because I feel like when I feel my most masculine, is when I'm dressed like this. And for the
Ah!
record, I'm in a tiny little dress looking like Wednesday Adam with giant
Yeah.
stilettos. My legs are out. It's like, I don't know. There's something about for me, like my masculine energy really comes out when people would look at me and feel like I'm most hyper feminine. It's like it's
Mm.
when I feel my most confident to me is like when I feel my most masculine, but it's like that very much
Ooh.
has been reclaimed in a space that is like what's been labeled feminine in the past, maybe.
Yes.
Sorry. So yes, but like when I feel like I guess like my most feminine, it is like kind of the opposite. It's when I'm like being very like nurturing and like introverted and like taking that time for myself, and I'm like giving to myself like that's like when I'm in my matching sweatsuit and like
Yeah.
and I'm being a little bit more casual, but it's like I don't know, that to me is like my more like feminine energy, is like
Mhm.
that giving to self, kind of moment in my life. I don't know, they're
Mm.
very like contrasting kind of
Yeah.
parts of my life, I guess now.
And it's
So,
so individual, and I want people
mhm.
to be able to decide, like, does this feel true to you? Does this resonate with you? And if it's not resonating with you and you're like, honestly, Kane, Miles, I don't want to subscribe or care about binaryism, even
Yes.
in if it's masculine, feminine energy and all of that. That's totally fine and that's
Totally.
fair. Like I think we're gonna get to a place in the future where none of that's even necessary. The
100%.
reason why we're still using this language like masculine and feminine energy is because that's the current understanding that we're
Yes.
in. And we were raised and conditioned within a world where we were taught to look at and assign certain energies to
Mhm.
different things. So it's almost like when you hear gendered language,
Yes.
right? And you're like, okay, well, how did they make those decisions? You know what
Yeah,
I mean? Like it's
exactly.
so deeply rooted that that's just what we have right now. But I would love to get to a place where I don't have to separate those parts of myself. They can
Totally.
all just exist in
Yeah, we could just
harmony.
flow through
Yes.
it.
Fluidity.
The
Yes.
best.
Be human.
Exactly,
Yeah. That's the
exactly.
goal.
So before we finish the podcast, I do
Ugh,
wanna
already.
quickly talk a bit about, I think, like, 'cause we haven't had really time to
Yes.
talk about your disability
Yes.
at all, and, like, I guess, like, for me, it's also something that I wasn't really super aware of. So this is gonna be something that I'm gonna be learning about today too. So
Okay.
could you tell us a little bit about, and is disability, like, is that okay to say? Like,
Yes. Yes.
I'm still, it's an area where I'm still trying to like learn and grow and like what is the inclusive language for that now. But
Yes.
yeah, could you tell us a little bit about your journey, I
Absolutely.
guess, with that?
I love this. Thank you for giving me a chance to talk about this as well. I think in terms of it's so similar
Yeah.
to maybe folks who are starting to learn about transness and
Yes.
queerness and it kind of getting more familiar with the language and what's okay and where are we at with that. So with disability is same thing as trans, it's like a word that's a placeholder to tell you that someone faces systemic and social,
Mhm.
physical, mental, learning, all kinds of different barriers when they are trying to exist in the world. It doesn't necessarily mean that I feel like I'm disabled when I'm alone.
Yeah.
And that's something interesting to say, right? Because like
Yes.
I'm trans and genderqueer when I'm out in the world, but I'm just a person when I'm
Yeah.
home.
Totally.
So I do mention that I'm neurodisabled, and I like to get specific with it, just to shout out other folks out there as well. I'm autistic, self-diagnosed, and ADHD diagnosed. That's as far as I know.
Yes.
There might be more, but so that's how I move through the world. And it's actually interesting to look at studies and where
Mhm.
research is at in connecting the high statistics of trans people, non-binary included, and all other gender expressions, that we are more likely to be
Hmm. That's so
neurodisabled.
interesting.
Right. And so I think that's really beautiful because I like to say to people now that the best parts of me, of my personality and all the things people love about me, I strongly believe that they're because I'm autistic and
Huh.
ADHD. A lot of my quirks and my charisma and my presence and my sense of humor, like it
Yes.
all comes from that,
Totally.
So I think it's really beautiful and it okay, wait. What question did you have again?
No,
Let's
I
go
was
back
just
to
like,
you.
I was curious for you to talk about it, Like,
Yeah.
so I feel like you totally did
Yeah,
that.
I think like just shouting it out is
No, no,
super
no.
cool.
Is there anything that people like don't realize about like, about your disability that people should be aware
I
of?
think that it exists. I think
Yes.
because I'm there's a label that exists in the world that I've been told we're moving away from. We're not using it because it's another binary of high functioning versus low
Yes.
functioning. But I've had medical professionals kind of label me as you're more high functioning autistic or neurodisabled. And
Mm,
I'm like, that's not really helpful because it actually means that you're telling me that I am able to mask, which is when you hide your disability or hide the things that would, yeah, like kind of give away that you're autistic or
yes.
ADHD, that I'm able to hide and basically act my ass off. I should get
Mhm.
a Grammy for this,
Yeah.
or not a Grammy, what is it, an Oscar for
Yeah.
this, because I've spent so much of my life creating a personality and a persona that
Mhm.
I hid behind. And it's literally what I did with transness, I also did with my disability. And so that created such a painful place for me to be where it's like I can't even physically be myself in the world, but I also mentally have to hide so many parts of how I want to express and speak and
Mhm.
how creative I can be and my ideas because I was always kind of shut down. Oh, you talk too much or you're too passionate. Like my
Yeah.
passion was too much for people. I'm like,
Ugh.
oh my God, if I'm too much, then you're not enough. Like just
Totally,
keep it
exactly.
moving, you know? But it's hard to say that when it's your teachers and it's
Yes.
your doctor and it's your parents and it's your community everywhere you go, you know?
And it's so hard when there's not like a visible thing that you can see, you know? And so like
Exactly.
people I find don't have as much like empathy or like just take the time
Yeah,
to
it's like
like
fix it. Like,
understand
what's wrong
more.
with you? Like, oh, you're struggling with this. Like, set alarms if you can't be on time. I'm like,
Totally.
time blindness is a thing.
100%. So like
Yeah.
I'm also like so I'm super dyslexic. And like it's
Yes.
like, you know, I struggled so much going through school because like no one was like teaching me in a way that like I could learn, you know? And like
Oh
they
my
never
God.
really wanted to recognize
So then
it.
you feel like you're behind or you're
Yeah.
slower or yeah, you
But it
can't
was
do
like, you
it.
know, English was one of the hardest ones because like
Mm-hmm.
reading and spelling, it's like I just the way that I read and the way that I spell, it's like it's so different than other people,
Yeah.
you know? Like I can read things so quickly, but then like I can tell you everything about it, but
Yeah.
then like if I was to read it out loud, I sound like I can't read, you know? And it's like it's so
And what
strange.
that does to your
Yeah,
self-esteem and your confidence when you're younger, and then you also said, like, growing up Nova Scotia, like, you didn't have visible queer and
totally.
trans people, so it's like, how do you even navigate all of that? You just did you shrink? Did you
Yeah,
hide? Yeah.
100% same. Like I just like I was like, okay, I'm gonna push myself to be like really good at the things that I am. I'm gonna like try my best to get through the things that I'm not. And I think it's also like it's a big reason why I think I never went to university as well because I never
Mm.
felt like I could, and I needed to figure out like how to survive in the world
You know what?
without
I
education.
still feel that way right
Yeah,
now. So like I said, I'm turning 30 this month and I've graduated in the pandemic with a 2-year diploma from social service work from
congratulations.
George
Oh.
Brown. Thank you so much. It was probably one of the biggest accomplishments of my life other than getting top surgery and going on hormones, but I haven't decided if I'm going to go to university yet because it doesn't feel like we're at a place where it could accommodate
Hmm.
neurodisability in the
Yes,
ways that I need. And looking back, the thing that maybe you and I both needed were teachers who were
yeah,
actually better trained and
totally.
qualified to help kids like us in
Yes.
class because that didn't really exist when I
No.
was growing up.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I feel like this is a whole other
Oh, it
episode
is.
too that I'm like just like wanting to dive into.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we are running out of time. So where can people find you, my gorgeous Kane?
Ah,
And like
thank
where can they
you.
learn more about you?
Oh, okay. Shout out to my friend Joy, who's in the process of working on my website. It looks
Ooh.
beautiful. It's going to be super genderqueer, color themed, but it's coming. So for now, you can find me on Instagram at Kain Nathaniel. And you can find more info about my consultancy at True Lives Consulting on Instagram as well. I will be branching out, but it's coming.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for your vulnerability and this conversation. This was a gem,
Oh,
and we need to have you back.
we
So,
need this podcast, and I'm so happy to come back.
uh,
Thank you for having me. This was absolutely so beautiful, so much fun to do, and I can't wait to see what else you have in
oh my
store for
God,
the season.
stay tuned.
Yeah.